South Africans, especially those from lower income households, are feeling the pinch as the cost of living rises at an alarming rate. Food prices have doubled over the past 5 years. And right now we're speaking to Mervyn from the Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group to look at the key contributors to these drastic food prices and their increase. Good morning, Mervyn, and thank you so much for your time. Welcome.
Good morning, and good morning to all your viewers.
Now, Mervyn, over the past month alone, like rice and sugar beans have increased by over 30%, while other items such as eggs, sugar, peanut butter, I mean, all the things I love personally have gone up by over 20%. Now, to what would you attribute this tremendous increase in food prices?
So we have seen fluctuations of food prices both at a global and at a local level. And there are a number of factors that have influenced this, at least over the last 5 years. But even if we look just over 1 year or 2 year periods. So we have seen global conflicts contributing to increased food prices. We've seen the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Of course, prior to that was the COVID. And then the opening up of the world, we had lots of logistical problems trying to get movement of goods and services. And when we look, for instance, at rice, then we also see an issue around climate change. So South Africa doesn't produce its own rice. We buy rice on the global market. India is a big global supplier, and they've had droughts in various parts of their country. So the government has prioritized keeping their produce local. And that has meant less rice on the global market. And of course, that has increased the price that we have to pay for it. And then we have struggling with our ports. So importing foods, exporting has become a big problem because of the collapse of our infrastructure around our ports. So all of these things have played some role in keeping food prices high to the extent that our food basket has almost doubled since we had first started tracking this basket 5 years ago. And the cost of this basket now stands at about 5,330 Rand, which is way in excess of your national minimum wage. So if you look, for instance, at the national minimum wage this month, it would have brought in the region of about 4,600, 4,700. And yet a basket of very basic foods for a household of 7 will cost you about 5,300. So therein lies some of the problem, that the price keeps increasing, fluctuating, but wages are not keeping track. And that is having a major impact on household affordability. So they just cannot afford to eat anymore.
Now, that sounds to me like a crisis. Is this not tantamount to a crisis, Mervyn? I mean, if now the average South African citizen cannot afford to eat.
This is a major crisis. I believe, and talking to people at grassroots level, that is one reason why we saw the election results quite in that way, why the ANC was punished by a lot of South Africans, because you ascribe your cost of living crisis to the government in power, of course.
Yes.
So quite a lot of the protest vote against the ANC has to be connected to the cost of living crisis. So that is one issue. But Mtseko, if we look at some of the latest information, so for instance, 2 days ago, UNICEF, the United Nations body for children, had brought out a very good report in which they say that about 23% of South African children live in food poverty. That means that they only eat 2 kinds of foods. They only eat starch and perhaps a little bit of meat or something. Now that's not nutritional for children. And the problem with that is that has impact on our educational outcomes. It has impact on the way we use our health services, because children in child poverty tends to get sicker more often than other children. It also has a major impact on our economic productivity, because these children are more likely not to be able to benefit from education, and then they get into the labor force and they will not be able to compete with other workers in the new global economy. And so it has a major impact for South Africa if we ever want to resolve our poverty and inequality trajectory.
Please tell me about the work that the Pietermaritzburg Economic Justice and Dignity Group do, and especially if there are any special recommendations that you have perhaps made, especially in light of the fact that you've indicated that 23% of South African children live in food poverty. What do we do? What's next?
So really we have to look at it from two perspectives. You know, number one, we have to ensure that children have the ability to eat a proper nutritional meal. That is critical, because we are building the future of our country on the children that are below 5 years old today. So it's a long-term project. So in that area, we have recommended and we have called on government to always link the child support grant with the food poverty line. So the food poverty line at the moment, that as worked out by Stats SA, is 760 Rand in order to purchase enough food for one person in the country. That the child support grant must be linked to that. So the child support grant is somewhere in the region of 540 Rand or 560 Rand at the moment. So there's a big gap. So can we first close that gap? That's the intermediate solution. Then for the long-term solution is that we have to change the way we produce and the way we bring food to the table. So the example for that is that we grow most of our tomatoes, for instance, on massive big farms in Limpopo. Can you imagine the cost involved in transporting that tomatoes to Durban or to Cape Town? So we need to bring our production level closer to our cities, what we call localized food systems. And we need to expand that by bringing more people in to the food economy. And that requires land redistribution, particularly to women in areas around our cities, in order for us to be able to produce more food closer to where people are. Less logistics, less petrol expenses, less all of those. And in that way, bring more food, which would also drive down the cost of food.
This makes a lot of sense.
A program.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. And I love these solutions that you are proposing. There was a week about 7 weeks ago where for 1 week, I couldn't find tomatoes anywhere. And at the point at which I did, a bag of 6 tomatoes were about 60 Rand. And I'd like to think I'm somewhere in the middle class. Now, it goes further than people who are living below the breadline, but also talk to me about the impact of middle income earners.
So the middle income group in South Africa is under immense pressure. We're under immense pressure because our economy isn't growing, because of this high cost of living. The Reserve Bank increases interest rates. Now, many of us in the middle class, we've got a bond, we've got a car installment, we've got a credit card, etc. So every rate increase by the Reserve Bank or keeping it at this high rates means we have more of our money that we earn are going to debt repayment. So that puts us in a situation where, for instance, in the middle class, we are seeing more and more the case where they are buying their food with their credit card. So actually food is being added to our credit bill, which is extremely bad long term because we are paying so much more for our debt. So that's what's happening in the middle class. They're under immense pressure. Then when we look at the lower income group,
and the
working class in South Africa.
And the unemployed as well. Talk to me about them.
Exactly, exactly. So when we look at the low income and the unemployed, then the survival strategies there are to eat less food and to eat less quality food. What I mean by that is that instead of eating 3 meals, they eat only 1 meal a day. And instead of eating proper vegetables with some meat, etc., different food groups, they are now only eating like maize meal and bread, which is only one food group, starches, because now it's not so much about nutrition as it is about keeping hunger away from the door. So both those survival strategies are bad, both for the person as well as for our society and our economy. And that is why dealing with this food crisis and this cost of living crisis must be the first priority of a government of national unity. If they are not going to get that together, then we are going to see citizens taking other options. Because now voting hasn't solved the problem. So then what else? How else can we resolve the problem outside?
Now we're creating more problems on top of the problems that we already have. Now, what is the average percentage per household capita spent on groceries, on a food basket currently?
So according to our research, which is kind of generalized average out research, because each household, of course, will be different.
Sure.
But when we average it out and when we look, for instance, at those in the working class and who earn a national minimum wage, then this is the breakdown that most of our research shows. It shows that about 36% of the income is used on transport, which makes sense. I mean, if you've got a job, you've got to keep that job.
Yeah.
And the poorest people in South Africa, because of apartheid geography, lives furthest away from their work than the middle class. So that's
100%.
a problem. So 36% goes to that. We then see about 19% go to prepaid electricity. And there's a direct connection between the cost of electricity and the ability to cook, because you need electricity to cook. So when electricity prices go up, that means that there's less money available for food. So there's a direct connection between these two things as well. And then when we look at those two expenses, we see that that would take about 56% of a national minimum wage. So that then leaves something like 2,000 Rand to buy food, which is about, your 45% of your income. But as I've said, a basket of food will cost you 5,300 Rand. And you've only got 2,000 Rand to buy that basket.
Does that include meat?
That includes meat, that includes your domestic cleaning products, that includes everything else.
Jeez.
And if you have to pay rent, then that rent will also come from that 2,000. So you can see how workers are struggling in South Africa, even if you do have a job, let alone if you are unemployed.
So technically, we're being failed by the system, Mervyn. I mean, when you speak of the connection or the connectivity between the layers that you've indicated, from education to food security issues, I mean, it almost feels to me that we are being systematically oppressed.
Well, our system hasn't been thought through. That's how I'm thinking, that we make solutions without looking at the entire big picture. So, for instance, the ANC government did a very good thing by introducing the school feeding scheme. So through that means they are getting a proper meal to millions of South African children. So that's a good angle. But what happens, they haven't thought through what happens to the child between the ages of 0 and 5 before they enter into the school system. Because that is the time when the brain capacity of that child is being developed. Now, that child either depends on a child support grant or not. And then the child support grant is so low that the households can't buy sufficient food for that child. So our policy system is varied. It hasn't looked at this trajectory from conception right into the workplace. How do we ensure that from conception to the workplace, we have the ability at least to access sufficient and nutritious food. And I think if we can get that right, which means we need to get our land issues correct, as I've said, we've got our food systems issues correct, we need to get our wages and our social grants tied into this program, then I believe as a country, we will see major development outcomes within at least 5 to 10 years.
Thank you so much for your time, Mervyn. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate solutions-driven conversations as this has been, and for providing us with some insight on what could possibly work for South Africa moving forward. Thank you.